Imagine a time when BBC News wasn't the instantly recognisable brand that it is today. Early TV news broadcasts were a chaotic mix of newsreels, radio bulletins, and inexperienced newsreaders. From lo-fi opening graphics to an explosion of CGI, from tiny low-quality sets to giant virtual ones, from rousing theme tunes fit for a royal to electronic ones fit for a dance floor. It took the BBC a long time to find the right look and feel for its news brand. This is the story of how the BBC evolved from pretty humble beginnings into one of the most recognisable names in news. The early days of TV news on the BBC featured bulletins that began with rousing theme tunes and pulsing antennas, or the BBC coat of arms, accompanied by a xylophone. By the late 1960s, more tangible branding started to appear. An authoritative staccato theme song was introduced, accompanying a still image from the day's top story, overlaid with straps saying BBC TV News, featuring an early version of the BBC blocks. This branding was used until 1976, when it was replaced by a map of the world and two circles coming together with BBC News written on top. In 1979, a blue variant of the same design was used, except BBC News was now in a sans serif font and the circles didn't animate. In 1981, a new fully computerized set of graphics were introduced, including a new sonic theme as well. The thumping authoritative orchestration accompanied graphics that featured a striped circle, which represented a globe, the time, or in the case of the 9 o'clock news, the number 9. The words BBC News animated onto the bottom of the screen like a typewriter. And a few years later, they introduced a blue variant of this design as well. Amidst the intros for these main BBC News bulletins, there were also intros for programs like Nationwide, Breakfast Time, and the short-lived but memorable 60 Minutes, whose opener looked and sounded like an ad for Terry's Chocolate Orange with music by ABBA. In 1984, each of the main BBC News bulletins was given their own distinct branding, including unique theme tunes and bespoke computerized graphics. This included the 6 o'clock news, the 9 o'clock news, and the new 1 o'clock news. The 9 o'clock news then went on to receive another update in 1988 after changing formats. Designed by Martin Lambie-Nairn and his company, this design referenced the BBC coat of arms and the original BBC newsreel design, complete with ripples emanating from the antenna. However, Lambie-Nairn was quite disappointed with the end result, mainly due to the music by George Fenton, which he saw as overly patriotic and not atmospheric enough. By this time, there were 3 separate identities being used to represent BBC News, depending on the time of day. And the 1981 design was still in use for breaking news and off-schedule bulletins. In 1993, the BBC undertook its most significant rebranding of TV news bulletins up to that time, fully embracing new technology. All the main BBC One bulletins were relaunched, with opening titles featuring a giant glass BBC coat of arms sculpture with a spinning globe in the middle. The camera would pull back and pan across to reveal newsreaders at a giant desk. Instead of bespoke graphics for each bulletin, they all shared a unified look and feel, with only subtle tweaks to backgrounds and colour schemes to match the time of day. Each major bulletin still had unique theme tunes, all newly arranged and played by the BBC Orchestra. Aside from the BBC News logo that appeared briefly on top of the coat of arms, and the name of the specific bulletin appearing at its close, there were no traditional opening titles. Interestingly, the studio was mostly fake. The coat of arms, the background, the desk, and even the lights were all computerized. While this succeeded in bringing all the main BBC News bulletins into the same universe, it created limitations. There were no consistent logos for the programs, and there was an over-reliance on the computerized set to fill the void of a graphical architecture for things like photos, quotes, finance, and other elements. In the world of the set, there were no pure graphics. Most elements, including the day's headlines, revolved around or seemed to take place within the giant coat of arms. The lack of graphic architecture posed challenges for extending the branding to other platforms, like a website. The music also presented issues. The creators had to negotiate with producers and editors to maintain the distinctiveness of each bulletin, which left the broader BBC News brand without consistent sonic branding. The complexity of the orchestral arrangements and the variety of different themes made them difficult to remember and recognise, particularly for breaking news and weekend bulletins.
Good afternoon. At Stormont.
But despite these limitations, the 1993 rebrand was an important step towards unifying the BBC News brand. The next rebrand would not only set up BBC News for a digital future, but influence global TV news branding forever. By 1999, BBC News as a whole lacked a consistent identity. While BBC News 24 had moved towards a minimalist, stripped-back identity, the main bulletins, as well as breakfast news and regional news, all had different looks. Lambie Nairn, who had rebranded the entire BBC 2 years before, took on the project of a holistic rebrand of BBC News. The design agency drew inspiration from the BBC's long history of news production. They incorporated elements like the ripples from the early newsreel days, the globe, central to the BBC One identity, and even, seemingly, a colour scheme from the 1970s design. The result was modern and bold for its time, featuring a cream and red colour scheme, ripples pulsing inwards and outwards, spinning globes, clocks, and world maps, all within angled red ellipses. City names appeared as anagrams, constantly flicking through, and a number representing the time of day, or 24 for the news channel, rotated from different angles. The new music was a drastic departure from the past. Lambie Nairn wanted a sound that was more accessible but still trustworthy, and moved away from the authoritative orchestral arrangements of the past. He found inspiration in the pips, the Greenwich time signal used on BBC Radio. Composer David Lowe turned the pips into a heartbeat, building tension with dynamics and layers of instrumentation until the minor chord resolved. This 1999 rebrand unified BBC News' global output, creating a consistent look, feel, and sound across all broadcasts. While regional and breakfast bulletins had their own spins on this core theme, the influence of this rebrand is still evident more than 20 years later. It not only unified the look and feel of BBC News, but it set a new standard for TV news branding globally. After BBC News broadcasts shifted to a black and red set of graphics known as the clamshell design from around 2003, Lambie Nairn was brought back in 2008 to once again unify the look and feel of BBC News. The white look, as it's called, is still in use today and incorporates many of the elements from the 1999 package. The pulsing spheres are there, but they now revolve around the globe. These shapes now serve as placeholders, inside of which you can see a spinning world map. The names of cities feature again around the frame, floating and moving as if anchored to different parts of the spinning globe. And the final frame reveals a numeral in negative space, representing the bulletin you're watching. accompanied by the BBC News logo in the left-hand corner. This rebrand continued to build on the strong visual identity established in 1999, ensuring that the BBC News brand remained modern and cohesive across a growing number of platforms. The consistent use of these elements has helped maintain a recognisable and trusted brand. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And a quick look at a montage of news openings from around the world, particularly in Europe, reveal countless doppelgangers of the BBC News Open, along with electronic versions of the pips. Some of these were even created by Lambie himself. While it may seem commonplace now, the revolutionary impact of the BBC's 1999 news rebrand can't be underestimated. It redefined what news could look and sound like. Although some initially missed the grandiose sets and found the new presentation style somewhat cold and corporate, it successfully reduced the pomposity of news branding. The fact that the BBC, one of the most authoritative names in news and broadcasting, commissioned and rolled out such a groundbreaking rebrand is significant. If the BBC could open their bulletins with a dance track and maintain their credibility, it meant that others could too.
9 people died in a car accident.
Looking back at the BBC's television news branding journey, it's clear how experimental and dynamic they've been. From bland to bespoke animations, filming in newsrooms to virtual sets, and orchestral anthems to dance tracks, they've continually evolved with the times. Now, with the current graphics package nearly 20 years old and the music well past its prime, the question is, what will they do next?